Hey everyone, it's John Little here. And what I'm going to do in this video is I'm going to go over an essay that I just published yesterday. And the title of the essay is Dead Sea Scrolls Fragment 7Q5. Is it from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verse 52 and 53? And so this is quite interesting to me. I remember when I first had heard about some people, some scholars, that have made the case that this fragment from the Dead Sea Scrolls from Qumran, which was discovered in the late 40s, they claim that this fragment is of the Gospel of Mark. And so then as I read more about it, I found out that a consensus of scholars had rejected those who made that case, that it is of the Gospel of Mark. So, but as time has gone on, and the more research that I've done over the years, I have come to start to question the consensus that comes from scholars. I'm not going to go into that at this point right now because I want to cover the essay. So I thought, well, I'll check this out myself. I'll actually do some research and figure out if this is from the Gospel of Mark, because I've got experience with working with ancient Greek Bible manuscripts. I've also worked with some Latin manuscripts. So I've got some experience. And so as I started looking into it, and actually I decided to just go all out. And I started this deep research on this fragment almost a month ago. Even made a video and talked about, I just actually went through the manuscript and pointed out some preliminary thoughts. And quickly, I realized that this is not of the Gospel of Mark, unfortunately, because I would have loved for this fragment to be from the Gospel of Mark, because it would have absolutely, if that was proven and others would, push it and scholars would take it serious, then this would absolutely be a tremendous discovery. But very quickly, as I looked into it, unfortunately, I realized it. So what I did was, I decided, like I said, to go all out. And I even spent 9 days and many hours a day trying to find a match to try to confirm where this actually comes from. But the problem is, this tiny fragment, which has very little to work with, doesn't allow you to know for sure, 100% for sure. But I did, after checking thousands and thousands and thousands of possible matches, using what letters that are available in this fragment, I came to a conclusion that there's 2 really good possibilities. And I'm sure there's more. And I did find actually a lot of different fragments, or a lot of different matches, but they didn't match up as well as the ones that I'm going to present here in this essay. So, and just to tell you a quick little story, I was kind of devastated at first, but during those 9 days, about the end of the 9 days, when I had pretty much went through and found all the possible matches, I had everything on a document here on my computer, and I left my computer on, and overnight the power kicked off for a little bit, and it happened in the middle of the night. So I got up and turned the computer back on, pulled up the document, and where I had just opened my eyes and not realizing what I was doing, I end up deleting the autosave document. And I lost everything except for probably the first couple hours of working on this fragment. So I lost every one of those. And I had about 15 to 20, well, maybe around 15. It was a dozen or so anyway, of really good matches, decent matches, but they all were kind of problematic in little parts of it. But I did remember the 2 that I felt was the best matches. And so I went back and put all that together and built reconstructions and went ahead and finished the essay. But there for about 30 seconds after I realized what I'd done, I was completely devastated. But then I realized that, I prayed right then and there, and I asked God, okay, what do you want me to do from here? Is this a sign that you just want me to stop, or do you want me to go on? And I felt that God wanted me to go ahead and go on and finish this. And perhaps he just gave me a little shortcut to where I didn't have to worry about adding all those other possible matches that, they weren't good enough. So anyway, let's go ahead and jump into this essay. And as you can see on the screen here, I have a couple of different images of this fragment of 7Q5. There on the left is an actual photocopy of it, and the image on the right is an infrared enhanced image of it. And the infrared enhanced image actually does make some of the, a lot of the ink marks more visible. It gives you just a little more detail. And so I use the infrared image throughout this essay. Now, one of the things that I did some reconstructions, and I go through each and every line of this fragment into great detail. And what I did is what you'll see, just to kind of give you a heads up as we get ready to go through this, is that when I made reconstructions, I actually used the sections of the fragment itself. And so I would reconstruct, and I would use as many of the letters from the actual fragment itself, and then I would also use images from other letters from other fragments from Cave 7. So I just wanted to let you know it's unique. I don't know if anybody else has ever really tried that. I'm sure somebody has. But it really comes in handy. It really comes in handy to reconstruct and to kind of give you an idea on the other parts of the fragment where it's been decayed and lost due to fading, or there's holes, big holes in this fragment. It's tore. There's very little to work with. So I'll go ahead and start. Let's go ahead and just jump right in here. Now, the 7Q5 fragment was found in Cave 7 along with other Greek fragments. Among the Dead Sea Scrolls collection of fragments and larger portions of manuscripts, most of them have Hebrew and Aramaic script. But Cave 7 is unique because it contained only Greek fragments. Now, in my most recent essay on 7Q1, which is another fragment of the Dead Sea Scrolls found in the same cave, I made the argument against certain scholars, and I found that the fragment was 100% a Septuagint reading from the book of Exodus, while the scholars claim that it supported the Masoretic text over the Septuagint. Now, in this essay on 7Q5, I make the argument against those who claim that this fragment is a fragment from the Gospel of Mark, chapter 6, verses 52 and 53. Personally, I would have loved the fragment to have been a section from the New Testament Gospel. But after examining the fragment, I am 100% certain that it is not. Now, after spending many days and hours searching for a possible match for fragment 7Q5, I have narrowed it down to two possible matches, that being from Leviticus chapter 16, verse 3 and 4, and the book of Job, chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Now, I examined other possible matches, but those two matches were the best. The problem with finding a match with any certainty is that the fragment offers very little to go by. There are only two possible complete words in the fragment. That's to and kai. And quite possibly only one complete word, being the word kai, which translates to and, which is one of the most common words that there is. There are only 8 total letters that you can be 100% certain about, and about 7 or 8 that are faded and distorted due to damage that happened over a couple thousand years of decay. The only thing that you can be certain about when trying to find a match for this fragment is that you cannot be 100% certain at all. When I first started searching for a match, I was hoping and intending on finding a match that I could be 100% certain about. But after a very intense undertaking of searching through the Greek Septuagint, I found over 8,000 passages that had similar words and letters, but only a little over a dozen places that were remotely close to matching up all lines, along with reasonable estimated line lengths per row. I also sifted through the Greek version of the Book of Enoch, because there have been others, most notable Peter Flint, who speculated that the fragment 7Q5 is of Enoch, but I did not find anything that came close to comparing to some of the matches that I found in the Septuagint. Now, in 1972, a papyrologist by the name of Jose O'Callaghan made the argument that fragment 7Q5 was a fragment of the Gospel of Mark. There have been others that have followed in his footsteps, and books have been written making the case. Now, there's a book called 7Q5, the New Testament and the Dead Sea Scrolls, by Giuseppe Guarino, which was published in 2019, and New Testament Fragments Amongst the Dead Sea Scrolls by Bill Cooper. That was published in 2017. But the reconstructions of the text by those who argue for a Markan reading are quite disappointing in my opinion. The quotation of an excerpt from an online analysis explains it well, saying, quote, "For the reasons found herein, it is not unexpected that many paleographers have declined to welcome O'Callaghan's theory, as he is asking too much of so little. Pierre Benoit, director of the French Biblical and Archaeological School in Jerusalem, studied the actual fragments while O'Callaghan worked from photocopies. Benoit's conclusion was published in the New York Times when it says, quote, "The writing on the scraps of papyrus is indistinct. Father Benoit said in an interview, but even by stretching his imagination, he was unable to make the marks that do show up coincide with the Greek letters necessary to prove Father O'Callaghan's suggestion, that is, the Greek letters in the Gospel of Mark 52 and 53. Indeed, one spot that showed up in the photocopies as a possible part of the Greek letter in Father O'Callaghan's reading turned up in the original fragment to be merely a hole in the fragment." And a quote from that article. See, that's just one of the many examples of how problematic this argument is about it being of the Gospel of Mark. Is, just like that one problem there, that the original guy who made that reconstruction and claimed that it was from the Gospel of Mark, he thought some of the ink marks, or one of the ink marks was, and it ended up being a hole in a fragment. So that's just one of many problems with the argument. I'll get into that as we go on. Now, in this essay, I'm going to present every part of the fragment in detail and then make my case about what I see the possibilities of what this 7Q fragment is from. This will probably be one of the most thorough breakdowns of this fragment that you can find. I will present my reconstructions of the possible readings of the fragment and then a letter-by-letter analysis of the fragment so that you, the reader, can see for yourself and then make your own decision about what the fragment is from. I think the most likely reading that 7Q5 comes from is from Leviticus chapter 16, verses 3 and 4, because every line seems to match up nicely and far less problematic than any other possibility that I have ever seen. I also present a reconstruction from the book of Job, chapter 1, verses 18 and 19, which I find to be an excellent alternative, and which I will go into greater detail throughout the essay. So, right here you can see a couple images, and what this is a reconstruction of the fragment. And with this reconstruction, one of the things I did is I added an interlinear, Greek-English interlinear, for those words which the letters are found in the fragment. And what I did was I put them in bold and underlined the letters that are in the fragment. but I've got the whole passage with it. And I've got the image of the fragment beside those reconstructions. That way you can actually examine it that way. Makes it very handy. And we'll go ahead and move down. And so, in the reconstruction that I made, both the Leviticus and Job passages, I have the undisputed letters underlined and in bold, while the unclear letters are highlighted in the yellow, as you can see. And as for the many reconstructions like this, people will often use brackets. In fact, at the end of the essay, I provide some other reconstructions from others that have taken a crack at this and tried to figure out what it is. And most of them will use brackets. But I usually do not use brackets, but I prefer to use bold letters that are underlined. Now, as for line number 1, there is an ink mark that is visible. But it is not possible to be certain what it is, what it was before most of the letter was lost due to decay. I do not even speculate about what it is, because really any attempt is just pure guesswork. And I have placed the English equivalents underneath each word that has letters in the fragment. I have also provided English translations for the entire passages below, with underlined and bolded words that are in the fragments that are based upon each argument of the Job and Leviticus passage. So, as you can see, there's the English translation. And I'll just point out real quick, we're going to get into it here in just a little bit, but as you can see in the middle of the screen at the top of the fragment is an ink mark right there. As you can tell, it's impossible to tell what that is. So, like I said, I don't even guess on it, because it's really just kind of a waste of time. Okay, here's another image. And this image here is an image of the fragment, and I've put off to the right there what each line. Line 1, line 2, line 3, line 4, line 5. So when I go and reference what line I'm talking about, you can actually use that as a reference point. Now, okay, we'll take a look here at the first line. Like I said, I'll explain it a little bit. As you can see at the first line of this fragment, there is an ink mark that is unrecognizable. As you can see, I've got an arrow pointed to it. But those who support the mark reading speculate that the ink mark represents an epsilon, that is in the word epi. Epi means unto, translates to that, in Mark chapter 6, verse 52. But it is impossible to be certain what that ink mark represents. I don't feel that it's worth even taking the time to even guess, because it simply has little to no practical relevance. So what we'll do, we'll move on here. And that right there in the middle of the screen is an actual image of line number 2 of this fragment. Now, after checking over 8,000 possible matches for 7Q5 fragment, the two most likely readings based upon my research is from the book of Job and the book of Leviticus. And so what I did, as I've got in the middle of the screen now, is just, the passage, just using modern script, and got them side by side with a little English translation underneath them. Toi Ob Tone, which means to Job. Then Halakotoma for the Leviticus, and Kai. And Halakotoma translates out to whole burnt offering, and that's actually the Greek word that our English word comes from, called Holocaust. Halakotoma. Now, below is a reconstruction of what those readings might have looked like. I used as many letters from the fragment, 7Q5 fragment, to reconstruct. And I also used letters from a couple of other Dead Sea Scroll fragments, as well as a few etched markings to complete the letters of what they may have looked like. I placed an actual image of the second line of the unedited reading for easy comparison, and I did a lot of that. And right here, as you can see, At the bottom image that you see on the screen is of the second line. But above, I put the reconstruction using, like I said, using the images of each letter. And I would put them all in a order to where it reconstructs that text based upon those arguments I made. So take a little look at that. Now we're really going to get into breaking this down. So there at the far left corner at the top, those who argue that the fragment supports the Gospel of Mark claim that the reading of this line would be auton a, which auton means of them, and a is a definite article, means the. The ta and the omega are evident, but the space that comes before the ta looks like it might have some very faded ink, but it's not possible to be completely certain or what letter that it would be. But in this argument, I do make the case that yes, it's there were letters in these spaces, but there's something's happened, and it's just completely faded out. Especially, you can see a little bit of ink mark in front of the ta there in that image. And one thing that you'll find is the handwriting in this fragment it's got a lot of differences between your basic NCL manuscripts with NCL script. And what that means is they're all capital Greek letters, and there's no spaces between words most of the time, and there's definitely no punctuation. But when you look at that ta there, it's fancy. It's got a lot of hooks and serifs, and it also has a lot of cursive tendencies to it, and I'll get into that here in a little bit. But let's take a look here at this bigger image, and it looks very possible that those spaces in lines 2 and 3 are faded out, and that there probably were letters in those spaces, especially considering that this unique script is a continuous script with little to no spaces between words and no punctuation. Let me take a drink of water here. Now, there are signs that indicate that letters have been faded out because of decay, which is why there are spaces before each word, especially preceding the kappa in the third line. Look how much space there. You see that looks like a kind of a faded, looks like be a K in English. It's kappa in Greek. And then you look at the ink mark to the far left, and there's a humongous space there. Now, for one, that would be very unusual amount of space in the reading of this is estimated to be a fragment that goes back all the way to 50 BC. And that is most definitely a very unusual amount of space if there were no letters between that. Secondly, by looking at the first half of the kappa in the third line, the letter is faded significantly in the left stroke, which is probable that the fading got worse the farther left that you go, therefore appearing to be an empty space. Now, if that was actually blank space between the ink mark and on the far left and the third line of the kappa, it would appear to indicate that 2 columns would have existed, which is possible, and multiple columns do exist among the Dead Sea Scroll fragments. For an example, the Greek Minor Prophets. There's a lot of fragments on the Greek Minor Prophets. The manuscript is called 8 Hev Roman numeral 12 GR. And but spaces between the columns were much farther in that manuscript, at least 5 letter spaces apart, whereas 7Q5 appears to be no more than maybe 1.5 to 2 letter spaces apart. And I highly suggest that this space is simply a very faded area, perhaps due to being rubbed out, or the papyrus originally had weak spots in it. It's hard to say. When it's this old, you're going to have faded letters. You're going to have just a lot of things that's not clear. And the next one's a really good example here. As you can see, there's two images right here in the middle of the screen. And those who support the mark reading for 7q5 claim that the letter after the ta and omega is a nu, which would be an N in English. But as you can see in the images on the left image, what they call a nu, and the other image is an undisputed nu from the fourth line of the same fragment. There are obvious differences between the two. Either that is a nu that was done very carelessly by a scribe, which I seriously doubt, or it is a nu and perhaps something or it is not a nu and perhaps something entirely different. I make the case that it is either an iota and an omega together, or a mu, which would be an M in English. So let's go ahead, and now we're going to look at the second line according to the Job argument. That's what I'll do. First, as we go down these lines, I'll go through the Job argument, and then I'll go through the Leviticus argument. That is, if it is from Job, I'll examine that and give an analysis, and if it's of Leviticus, I will do the same. So the two images that you see here is of the second line of the fragment, and the image underneath, there at the top, that's just an unedited image of the fragment on line 2, and underneath it is a reconstruction based upon the potential Job match by using images of the letters of the same fragment and a beta from another Dead Sea Scroll fragment. If the fragment is from the book of Job, then this is what it would look very similar to. One thing that I do like about this is that they're all the same size. So instead of just using a modern script and kind of using, what you know about what the letters would possibly look like, you actually get to see actual letters from the same fragment that are undisputed, and you can make the comparison here. We'll jump down here. We'll take a look at some other things. So what you see here, these three images, I think that it is possible that the left stroke that I've circled in the image is an iota. As you can see, that far left, that's what they call a nu. But I think, according to the Job argument, it would be an iota, and not the left. I don't think it's the left stroke of a nu. And I have an image of an undisputed iota and a nu from the very same fragment on the sides so that you can compare. So you see the first image, I've circled that section. As you can see, I've got an actual image of an iota right beside it, and then there's a nu. Take a look at the difference of the nu compared to what they claim is a nu. Now underneath it, here's a side-by-side comparison of the faded letter or letters and what it would look like based upon an iota and an omega from the same fragment. That second image there, that's on the right side, is an iota and an omega from the very same fragment. And I put them side by side, and that's what it would look like. Looks very possible to me. Now, due to the hole in the fragment, it's not possible to be 100% certain about what follows. But we will take a look at it here. So I got it in the middle of the screen here. Try to adjust the screen so we can get it all in there. So the middle fragment is, it's an image, and it's got a large hole in a fragment and signs of an ink mark of what was a letter or a combination of letters following. There's so much decay that it's not possible to know for certain what that was. Those who argue for this being a Gospel of Mark fragment claim that an eta and a kappa followed what they claim is a nu. But for my reconstruction, based upon the Job reading, a beta and a ta would follow. And so you can make that comparison there. Now, let's take a look at the second line based upon the Leviticus argument. So the top image that you see in the middle screen It's of the second line of the fragment. And below is my reconstruction based upon the Leviticus chapter 16, 3 and 4 argument. Both images are lined up for easy comparison. Now, as I mentioned above, the space before the Ta and Omega is faded almost completely out. And after the Omega, it is faded and decayed and very difficult to be certain what the original letters were. Now, when I was examining the fragment in the line, especially the faded letter or letters that come after the toe, I was fairly certain that it was not a nu for reasons that I gave above. But along with the possibility that it was an iota and an omega, I also saw the possibility of it being a mu. That is, like I said, the letter M in English. In Uncial script and 2nd century BC cursive script, the mu can have a variety of different characteristics. Some of them have a rounded middle at the bottom, while some have a pointed shape. And I actually I put together 3 different mus from different ancient Uncial manuscripts. One of them is from Cave 7, another one's from Papyrus 66, and another one's from the Greek Minor Prophets. So you can see the middle there is rounded. Now let's take a look, and as you can see in the middle of the screen here is a couple of images. The top is of the unedited fragment, and the bottom is of the same fragment, but I have etched in what could have originally been a mu. And if you take a really close look at that, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of similarity there. And I think that that is probably the best possible match for this. Definitely not a nu. Okay, now we're going to jump down to the third line, and we're going to first examine the Job argument. Now we've got esthiontone, kai pinontone. And esthiontone means we're eating. And then you have kai means and pinontone means drinking. And so, as you can see in the images above, the Job argument works quite well. The small section of a letter in the far left of the fragment on the third line looks like it could have been part of an omega. It's not possible to be certain what that letter is due to how badly the fragment has been faded in that section. But it looks like it could be the left stroke of the omega with the connecting ta going slightly through it, which is likely due to the script having cursive tendencies. So let's take a look at what I just said there. Here's the 2 fragments, or the 2 images. And that far left on the third line is just an ink mark. It's impossible to know exactly what it is. But it does look like it could be the left stroke of the omega. And I got the omega, an image of an omega right underneath it. And that's an image of an omega that's in the same fragment. Now, the image here that I've got on the screen, the images, I reconstructed a ta and an iota from the fragment 7Q5 in order to give you an idea what those 2 letters would look like together with the same hand, the same scribal hand. And underneath, I put the Uncial letter that I claim to be a P, which, in algebra, they'll call it pi. In modern Greek, they call it pi, the alphabet. I was taught the Erasmian pronunciations and stuff, and it's called a P, which is exactly the P in English, but it looks totally different. And so I claimed it to be a P underneath for a comparison, as you can see on the screen. The top one there is the ta and iota put together, and then that's what I claim to be a P right there. Now, with close examination, one can see that they do look similar, but they have their differences as well. The bottom left stroke of the ta begins with more of a rounded ball, as you can see, and the other does not. Granted, the ta at the top of the left stroke looks faded, so we cannot really compare the distance of the left strokes between the two. But the stroke that goes to the right is a little shorter than the one below. Now, the iota in the top image has a break at the bottom and another little ink mark, while the other image does not. So, those are the differences. Now, this very part of the fragment is the Achilles heel of the argument made by those who argue that fragment 7Q5 is from the Gospel of Mark. There are a number of problems with the argument made. The main problem is that they claim that the reading here is a ta and an iota. But the Gospel of Mark does not even read that. It does not read tia parasentes, but rather dia parasentes, which in English it means crossing over. They claim that in this case, it would be a variant reading in the Gospel of Mark in which the delta would have been replaced with a ta. Now, there are absolutely no Greek manuscripts of the Gospel of Mark that uses tia parasentes in place of dia parasentes. And so what I did is I provided an image. And what this does, this shows you 38 different manuscript readings of the Gospel of Mark for that passage. And so on the far left there is the symbols of the names of the manuscripts. And we've got 38 different ones, manuscripts. And there's none that has that. It's all dia parasentes and not tia parasentes. But, the O'Callaghan, when he made his reconstruction, it doesn't even match the Gospel of Mark. And it's also not just problematic here, it's problematic in different parts as well. It's just makes for a very weak argument. Now, from the very first time that I studied this fragment, I have maintained that the letter is a P and not a ta and iota. I did search every single place in the Septuagint and the Greek version of the Book of Enoch that had a chi and a ta and iota together in order to see if there were any matches that was in harmony with the rest of the letters in the fragment. And I did not find any that matched up nearly as well as the Job and Leviticus matches. Now, there are others who also saw that this could be a P. Most notably is Kurt Allen and Maria Victoria Spatorno. I also found an excellent website that came to the same conclusion that it is a P. And on that website, they made the argument that this passage is from Jeremiah chapter 16, verse 3 and 4. This script has been referred to, the handwriting, as an ornamental or decorated style. And like I've said before, it also has cursive tendencies, which would explain why the P has such large hooks and end strokes. If in fact 7Q5 is from the book of Job chapter 1, 18 and 19, then it would read kai penanton. And again, that means and drinking. Now let's jump down to the third line based upon the Leviticus argument. I'm trying to shrink the screen here. I'm having a little difficulty with that. There we go. So this is the third line based upon the Leviticus. The top image is the actual unedited image. And then underneath is the reconstruction that, again, I used the actual letters from the same fragment along with other letters from cave number 7, other fragments. Indusetai kai paraskeles is what's accounted for here in the Leviticus argument. And let me jump down here. Let's make a little comparison here. Let's take a look at that ink mark at the very left side of line number 3. And like I said, you can't really, the above in the Job, it would have been, probably the left stroke of an omega. But here, it would be a T. A ta, which is a T in English. Now, the top on the left is a part of a letter, but due to the faded section between it and the kappa, it is not really possible to do much more than speculate what it is. But with the reconstruction that I made, it does make it a little easier to compare. In the Job argument, it would have been part of an omega, which does look possible. In the Leviticus argument, it looks like a ta. But, it would, a ta would be the likely match, or perhaps even an epsilon. I'm taking another drink here. All this talking dries my throat out. Okay, now what we're going to do, we're going to drop down to the fourth line Job argument. And so the top image is an image, it's an unedited image of what the fourth line is on this fragment. And then underneath it, I've got the reconstruction. Ekaphnes, pneuma, is what the reconstruction, that's what it would be. And ekaphnes translates out to the word suddenly. And pneuma is a Greek word that it can translate either out to, in this context here in the book of Job, it means wind. In the scriptures and in Greek, pneuma can also be translated out to spirit. You'll find that a lot in the Bible. So as you can see, the fragment is torn and a lot is missing from it. The obvious undisputed letters in the line 4 is the nu and the eta. On the left side of the nu is a partial letter. Many of those who speculate on what the partial and very faded letter is assume that it is another nu. But when you look at that faded and partial letter and compare it with an undisputed nu right beside it, there is a similarity between it and the right stroke of an undisputed nu. But there is an obvious difference as well. The faded and partial letter has a small line that passes all the way through the vertical stroke. But with the undisputed nu, the middle stroke does not go through the vertical stroke. Whatever the actual letter represents, it is surely faded enough to where it makes it uncertain. In the Job argument, this faded and partial letter would be a phi. It looks quite possible, especially when it is etched in like I did. And let me zoom in on this where we can actually compare an actual Greek phi to this partial letter that's faded and distorted. So there you can go. Take a look at that. The actual fragment, it's faded. You can't tell really what it is, but it does actually match up with a possible phi. So as for what follows the undisputed nu and the eta, the fragment is damaged and completely faded out. So you can see above in the images up here that the Job argument would call for a sigma and the word pneuma. We'll take a look at that just real quick. See. So the top middle image there is the actual image that's unedited. Look how much damages there is. You can't tell. There's what you see there is a hole in the fragment. It's not a ink mark or anything, and it's just completely faded out. But that's what it would look like if this was the Job argument. Let's move on down to the fourth line Leviticus argument. And the top in the middle screen, top image, is an unedited image of the fourth line. And then underneath it is the reconstruction based upon Leviticus argument. The Leviticus argument would call for zone lene zosatai, which means gird himself with a linen girdle. And so with this argument, so the partial and faded letter that comes before the undisputed letters of the nu and eta would be an iota in the Leviticus argument. And perhaps this is the weakest part of the Leviticus argument, even though it's not. I mean, it's not near as weak as some other arguments that people's made. But, when you compare the partial faded letter to an iota from the same fragment, there is the obvious middle stroke that distinguishes them from one another. Otherwise, without the middle stroke, they look similar. An unlikely scenario is that the lambda may have been connected to the iota and crossed through the iota slightly, considering that the script has cursive tendencies. But, or perhaps there's just a defect in it. And this, obviously it's faded and all that. So, who knows? Now, the damage and fading of the fragment that comes after the nu and the eta gives no hints to what comes at the end of the fourth line. But as you can see in the reconstruction based upon the Leviticus argument, it would be the word zosetai. Like I said, that would be gird. And it literally means shall be tied around. Now moving on down to the 5th line now of the Job argument. Okay, so this would be the 5th line in the Job argument, chapter 1, verses 18 and 19. Gonion tes oikias is what it would call for in the Job argument. And that literally means, gonion means corners, and tes oikias would be of the house. Let me zoom in here. So what we're going to do is we're going to make a comparison. The letter that comes before the undisputed eta is a ta based upon the Job argument. But when you compare the ink mark to an actual ta from the same fragment, it does not look all that similar. And this is problematic in my opinion. Even though it's not possible to know for sure what that ink mark is. And I do admit that it makes for somewhat of a weak batch in this section, but there have been others who claim and who have speculated that this is a ta as well. So, could be. Now let's move down to another couple of images of the same fragment. So, as for what comes after the undisputed eta, the Job argument matches up very well. Some have determined that the letter after the eta is an epsilon because of the little mark that appears near the top that runs through. But I think that it is probably there because there may have been a hook coming off from the right stroke of the eta and then connected to the sigma. We do not know, or we do know that there is a lot of fading and damage on that place on the fragment, even though that entire side the whole entire side from top to bottom is faded and damaged really bad. Scroll down here. Now here is a comparison between the faded and distorted letter in question with an actual undisputed epsilon from another fragment in Cave 7. The middle horizontal stroke of the undisputed epsilon is much farther down than the mark of another letter above, of the one above, and the middle stroke on the undisputed epsilon does not even cross through like it does on the other letter. As I mentioned above, I think there may have been a hook that came off the eta and connected to the sigma, but was partially faded out, which is possible considering that this fragment has cursive tendencies. So that's taking that very faded and distorted letter from the 5th line and comparing it to an actual epsilon. And you can definitely see the differences there. Scroll down. And this next letter, after what I determined to be a sigma, is so faded and distorted due to lots of decay and damage in that area. The only thing that we can see is that there are signs of a letter that was rounded to some extent, but it is impossible to be for certain what it is. In the Job argument, it would be an omicron. As for what comes after, it is completely faded and decayed, and there are no ink marks visible, and the reading is lost. So I believe that this is an omicron, and so I've put them, top and bottom so you can compare them. Now let's take a look at the fifth line, based upon the Leviticus argument. And the top image there in the middle of the screen is an image of the fifth line, unedited. And then underneath it is the reconstruction that I made. And what it would call for here in the Leviticus argument would be a perithesetai, which literally translates to shall put on. Now, in my opinion, this is the best match that I've seen for line 5 in the Leviticus argument. It matches up nearly perfectly. We'll scroll down. Zoom in here. So, it's not possible to be certain about what letter is in front of the undisputed eta, but we can see that the left side of the letter is rounded, and a theta is an excellent match. The images on the left compares the letter in question against an undisputed theta from another fragment from Cave 7. Now, typically, the middle horizontal stroke of a theta goes all the way to both sides of the circle of the theta. But this one here from another cave, from another fragment in Cave 7, didn't have that go all the way across. But it was the only theta that I could find from Cave 7 to use as an example here. And as you can see, those look very similar and looks very possible that that's what that is. Scroll down here. And, I've already described everything concerning the letter after the undisputed eta above in the Job argument. So there's no need to repeat the same thing here in the Leviticus argument, because both the Job argument and the Leviticus argument call for the sigma coming after the eta. But the Leviticus argument would call for an epsilon after the sigma, which makes a great match here. So as you compare the two, I think the Leviticus argument definitely on the fifth line matches up perfectly. And that is the conclusion of the examination of this fragment. And so at the end of this essay, I put together some reconstructions from other scholars. And that way you can see what their arguments are. Now, Maria Victoria Spatorno thinks that this fragment is of the book of Zechariah, chapter 7, verses 3 and 5. And that's her reconstruction. And she uses brackets. And if you're familiar with reconstructions, right there in the middle is her readings. It's all in between the brackets there. Now, she also provides an alternative match. And she claims that it could be from the book of Enoch, chapter 15, verses 9 and 10. And it's one of those, you can take a look at that yourself. In this video, I'll put a link to the essay so that you can check it out for yourself, read it, and take whatever amount of time that you want to examine all this. Now, this image here in the middle of the screen is what was proposed by Jose O'Callaghan in 1972. He was the first one to make the argument that this fragment 7Q5 is from the Gospel of Mark. But the image actually comes from a book by Giuseppe Garino, and his book called 7Q5, The New Testament and the Dead Sea Scrolls. And it's a nice little reconstruction that he used there. What he did was he just used all capital letters from Greek. But, my reconstructions, which I prefer, is images. Each letter comes from the same fragment and also from Cave 7 as well. I had to use Cave 7 because not all the letters were found in the same fragment. Now here is a reconstruction by Maurice Bellet. I guess that's how you pronounce his last name. Bellet, maybe. And he published with the assistance of Marie-Emilie Boismard. I guess that's how you pronounce his name. And, it's a plate published, in a publication. And, it's alongside with the editor's transcription. And that's their transcription. That's the reconstruction. Well, actually, it's not really a full reconstruction, but it's a transcription of it. Now, this is what I found very interesting. I found an excellent site from lavia.org, and I provided the link there to it. So, and it's worth checking out. He makes the argument comes from the book of Jeremiah, and right there he does a really good job pointing out what he thinks the letters are, and then I did add a chart. This is a chart that shows all the different types of Greek scripts of the Greek alphabet. And what you'll find is the script that was used in 7Q5 is very close to what, according to this chart, would be a Greek cursive script, 2nd century BC Greek cursive script. It's not fully that, but there is a lot of similarity because, like I said, whoever the scribe was of this 7Q5 fragment has some cursive in it. He'll connect some lines together, and he's got a lot of fancy hooks and serifs and stuff that is different than your typical NCL manuscript or NCL script. So anyway, folks, I'll end the video here, and like I said, I'll provide a link in the description box below. That way you can check this out yourself. Take whatever amount of time you want, and if you have any disagreements with me, leave in the comment section what if you have a different thought on what this is. I'm definitely open. I'm not infallible by any means. I'm not a scholar. I would consider myself a very highly driven enthusiast when it comes to ancient Bible manuscripts. And that's, the way I am. I actually, for years and years and years ago, a long time ago, after I became a Christian in 1996, I got into Bible study, took it very serious. And I discovered that, the ancient Bible manuscripts, and I decided to teach myself Greek. And so, very limited back then. This is before you had all the help online that you have now. So I would buy grammar books and basically taught myself. And like I said, very limited, but learned the best I could. My brain's not necessarily wired to become an expert in the Greek language, not by any stretch of the imagination. But at least I did teach myself enough to where I can navigate through ancient Bible manuscripts and, better than just somebody that, on average. And so I was very fascinated with it, studied ancient Bible manuscripts, and then I got into researching and studying the early church fathers, and that really consumed most of my attention for years and years and years. I actually I published translations of early church father Bible commentaries and did other works as well. And so I got away from the Greek. I did study Latin. Again, it was all self-taught kind of stuff, so very limited. But I did learn enough to where I can navigate through Latin manuscripts as well, and did a little bit of translation work with that. But what I found is it was much better to hire translators to do the work. And I did that, published quite a few books that way, where I hired translators and I was the editor and did the whole publications myself. And so those books are out on the market. And so anyway, just want to give you a little bit of background on me Because, like I said, I don't claim to be a scholar, but I am very, got a lot of enthusiasm with all this. So, folks, I'm going to end the video here. I appreciate you all. Take care. Have a good